Welcome to the very first episode of the Aligned and Assigned podcast. I am your host, April, and we are going to be diving into my journey through reading the Bible in a year. I'll be focusing primarily on those stories that aren't often spoken about. And if I have an experience that I feel relates to that particular story, I will be sharing it. But if I don't have an experience that relates to that part of the Bible, then we're just going to talk about what I have observed and my interpretation of it. Today marks day 97 of me reading the Bible in a year. So that means today we are not talking about Genesis because I've already done that. But at some point in this podcast, I'm certainly going to double back because there are some things in Genesis, Exodus, and Judges that I have some strong feelings about. And I think we need to talk about them. Today we are talking about 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 16 through 28. Let me tell y'all how this story goes. There were two women, they were prostitutes, and they lived in the same house. And while they were living in the same house, they were both pregnant. The first woman gave birth to her baby, and 3 days later, the second one gave birth to her baby. Unfortunately, the second woman, at some point in time, rolled over on her baby at night and basically killed the baby. But what she did with her little deceptive self is she went and she stole the first lady's baby and gave her the dead baby. And she also went on to nurse this child as if this child belonged to her. So now we got a problem. They decided to go before King Solomon so that he could pass a ruling on the situation. They both go up to the king. They tell him their stories. And they're like, look, she done took my baby. No, I ain't take her baby. That's really my baby. The king was like, we gonna solve this problem. He calls for one of his servants to bring him a sword. And he said, what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut this baby in half. And both of y'all are gonna get a half. The first lady jumps up and she yells, no, please don't kill him. She can have him. And then the second lady, she goes on to say, no, cut him in half. So we both get a half. And that's when King Solomon was like, the one who wants the baby to stay alive, even if she doesn't get him, that's the mother. That's who'll get the baby. And let me tell y'all how that story sat in my soul, because it was a story of a mother who truly loved her child. Regardless of the circumstances of the situation, she didn't want anything harmful to happen to that child. Being a mother myself, I really don't know how I would have personally responded to the situation. I'm just going to be honest with y'all. I read it this morning because this is in line with my Bible study track. And came across me this morning. And I have really been thinking all day, what would I have done? And I honestly don't know. Of course, I'm going to go with the king's ruling, right? But I'm also like, I likely would have jabbed this chick. But back then, there were consequences for those kind of things. And who's really going to go just ensue a fight in front of the king? Don't judge me. I'm working on it. But it did remind me of my mother and the decision that she made that I felt was a hard one for her to make. And as a child, I hated her for this decision. I'm going to be very clear with you. I didn't understand her decision until I was an adult. When I was born, my father was already a drug dealer. Okay, he was out here moving that dough. We ain't talking about no petty stuff. But by the time I was 4, my mother was a drug addict. And she was really going through it, y'all. But she had split up with my father. She had full custody of my sister and I. And she just called my dad one day and she said, come and get them. And I spent my entire childhood hating my mom. And there are some scriptures that haunt me. Trust me, honor thy mother and father till your days may be long. I'm a little scared that my days won't be long because I certainly was not honoring my mother, but that's another story for another day. But when my mom started to get herself clean. And by this time, my daddy was doing all kinds of stuff that he ain't had no business doing. And it was time for him to pay for his lifestyle. In the words of the judge over his case, it was time for him to sit down. In other words, bro, man, you going to jail. And so when my father got his prison sentence, he sent my sister and I to live with my mother. By this time, I am late preteens, early teenage years, and my mother is clean by now. And she tells us that we can't go back and live with my father. It was time for us to stay with her. And although that was a great decision for her to make, baby, I was pissed with her. Do you understand me? Because I wanted to be with my dad. That's who I have been with majority of my life. But there's a time and a place for everything. By the time I was 18 years old, my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. We knew she was going to die. We just didn't know when. And that little girl inside of me had to know, why in the world would this woman give up her children to their father? Like, what mother wouldn't want her children to be with her? It was baffling to me because I was too young to understand. And so I asked my mother, and she was very ill, but I said, I just can't let her take this to the grave. I need to know. I said, Mom, I need to know, what made you give me and my sister to my dad and make you just leave us and desert us like that? And she said, April, let me tell you something. I was at a place in my life where I was down bad. And all I could think about was getting a hit. And I knew women who were allowing men to have sex with their daughters so they could get some money to get a hit. And I never wanted to put myself in a position to cause that kind of trauma for you and your sister based on some decisions that I had made at that time. And so I did the best thing I could do. And I called your father and I said, come and get him. And let me tell y'all how that just humanized my mother for me. And by this time, I'm 18 years old. I gave birth to my daughter when I was 19 years old. So maybe I was pregnant when I heard this story from her. I don't quite recall, but I know that she was sick when she told me about it. And I felt so much shame for hating her the way that I hated her. But it was then that I understood her love that she had for my sister and I. And so when I was listening to this story today, well, actually today I didn't listen, I actually read today. When I was reading this story today in First Kings about these two prostitutes going back and forth and King Solomon saying, we're going to split this baby in half. And the mother who actually had the child was like, absolutely not. I would rather protect that child before I hurt them. My mother rather protected my sister and I before she allowed us to be in a position to be hurt. And who can honor that? She got herself together. She made herself whole with God. She made herself whole with her children. And that is to be honored. So I will say to you this. I don't know what it is that you're going through. And I hope that the words that come out of my mouth shows you that there is beauty in ashes and that God gets the glory. Because no matter what was going on, he was protecting and he was covering my sister and I. Okay? I didn't know it as a child, but I know now. And now I can say that I am grateful for my mother and what she did to ensure that we were safe. I thank y'all for joining me on this episode today. I ask that you like, comment, subscribe, and share because we never know what word we might say that may help the next person out. We don't know what valley they are in, and maybe this could help lift them up and give them the courage to keep moving on to the next day. So I say to you today, I hope you spend some time with God, and I'll see you on episode 2.